Exactly 800 days remain until the presidential election of 2024, and though he's not even officially a declared candidate yet, Donald Trump is already trying to lose it. There's an old axiom in politics. Well, hell, I guess it's an axiom in life, really, and it's an axiom that I'm a big fan of. When someone hands you the moral high ground, stand on it and then stay there. Now, when Merrick Garland's stormtroopers raided Trump's private residence the other week, they made him into a righteously aggrieved party. I mean, I guess he already was a righteously aggrieved party, what with the Russia collusion hoax and the two fake impeachments and the nonsense with that fake January 6th committee that still is apparently holding fake hearings somewhere. And if you haven't been watching, don't feel bad, nobody else is either. And for a good number of weeks, Trump did exactly what you are supposed to do when you are a citizen who has been righteously aggrieved by the actions of corrupt martinet bureaucrats. He didn't say anything. There are times, lots of times in fact, when saying nothing is the absolute best strategic play. Trump had been in office as president for over 3 years before he started figuring that lesson out, and he did figure it out, and he's gotten better at it since he's left office, I think. Getting banned by Twitter was probably the best thing to happen to him, but even if he hadn't been banned, I think his tweeting volume probably would have gone way down anyway. A former president who wishes to be returned to office in a few years has got nothing to gain by badgering and flaming his replacement on a daily basis. If he did that, it would just look like he was making fun of a poor old dementia patient, because that's exactly what it would be. And he would make no benefit for himself by pointing out this administration's blunders that everybody can see perfectly well for themselves. When the campaign well and truly kicks off, when it's time to go head to head with whatever poor dumb bastards the Democrats wind up trotting out, that is when it is time to start running your mouth. That's when it's time to say, here you go, here's my track record, here's their track record, take your pick. And it was going so well. Right up until yesterday, because this thing Mark Zuckerberg said on Joe Rogan's show seems to have really set Trump off pretty badly. And now he's right back to screaming in all caps about the 2020 election being rigged. And that is the absolute last thing he should ever be talking about, because it cannot win him the next election. But it can lose him the next election, though. And it has nothing to do, I cannot emphasize this enough, it's got nothing to do with the question of whether the 2020 election was actually stolen or rigged or not. And I am not saying, I would never say that he doesn't have every right to be pissed off, because he very much does have that right. So Zuckerberg was on Joe Rogan's show on Friday? And he casually remarks, just shooting the breeze, oh yeah, right before the story came out about the Hunter Biden laptop, we got a call from the FBI. Saying there was about to be a big, high-profile Russian disinformation drop. Now, the FBI, they may be as crooked as the day is long, but they are not dumb. They know how to make people hear things that were never actually said. A dumb son of a bitch like Zuckerberg, they can play that idiot like a cheap fiddle all day long. They never had to say anything specifically about Hunter Biden or a laptop. They just plant enough seeds in the mind of their mark to lead him to connect the dots in his own brain. The FBI guys get to walk away with plausible deniability. Who, us? We didn't tell anybody to censor anything. I don't know what you're talking about. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where I shall be damned if I ever let Joe Biden rifle through my lingerie drawer. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I'm your eponymous host and humble servant. And it would be one thing if Trump had just complained, as well he should have complained, about the impropriety of a crooked law enforcement agency preying on the stupidity of a big tech oligarch to try and flip the result of a presidential election. But he got up to that point, and then he blew right past it, and now today he has been, unfortunately, demanding that he either be declared the winner of the 2020 election, or they need to do the election over, however the hell that would work. And if Donald Trump has ever done something dumber than this since he became a figure in national politics, I'm not sure that I know what it might be. He's taken a situation where he appeared as the persecuted victim of a deep state run amok, and rightfully so. where he was starting to be viewed as a sympathetic figure, even by a lot of people who can't stand him and didn't vote for him. But when he starts screaming about election do-overs, all that public sympathy and goodwill he was being given since the Mar-a-Lago raid happened, he has just given it all back. Now he just looks like a crazy person who wants to relitigate past elections. And look, he's got every reason in the world to be pissed off at the idiot Zuckerberg. Zuckerberg is not an innocent dupe here either, sure. He got played for a fool on the Hunter laptop deal, but 4 months prior to that, when he spent $400 million on what the fake news media hilariously described as an initiative to expand voting rights. That one he cannot play dumb on. He knew perfectly well that he was partnering with left-wing Democrat Party activist groups to place thousands of unmonitored ballot drop boxes in the most heavily Democrat precincts in the most important swing states. And he knew perfectly well that the desired result of that $400 million investment was Joe Biden winning the election. In fact, for as long as we have had industrial tycoons with political agendas and plenty of cash to throw around, those tycoons have tried to influence and sometimes steal outright our presidential elections. In the election of 1896, for one example, there were two factions in the Republican Party, much as there still are today. You had the corporatist wing and you had the populist wing. The champion of the corporatist wing in 1896 was Ohio Governor William McKinley. The champion of the populist wing, that was former New York Governor Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt made the industrial barons nervous for all the same reasons that Trump makes today's big tech oligarchs nervous. And in 1896, Roosevelt was just starting to build a national reputation, but it looked like by the time 1900 rolled around, he might start having sufficient support to make a run at the nomination. So they needed to sideline this guy and fast, stick him in some meaningless job where he can't cause any trouble, but it's got to be a high-profile enough job so he can't refuse it out of hand. And if you want to keep a guy out of the way and make sure he hasn't got any power, what better place to stick him than the vice presidency? So by the time 8 years have gone by, nobody will even remember who this guy Roosevelt is, and we won't have to worry about him causing any trouble. So the corporatists, they get their nominee with Bill McKinley. He and Roosevelt win the election handily. They win re-election in 1900 even more handily. And the scheme is going perfectly to plan for the first 4.5 years. Right up until the day some little Polish anarchist son of a bitch puts a bullet in President McKinley's chest at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo. And then, just like that, the last guy the industrial tycoons ever wanted to be the president was suddenly the president. And he had nearly all of McKinley's second term left to serve. It is impossible to overstate what an inflection point in American history the McKinley assassination really was. Millions of gallons of ink have been spilled speculating on how different history might have looked if the Lincoln or Kennedy assassinations had not come to pass. But as a practical matter, the killing of McKinley changed our subsequent history probably more than the other three presidential assassinations put together. Because we're not forgetting about President Garfield, who survived for a month with his fatal gunshot wound, which is pretty badass, and befits the character of a major general in the Union Army. If McKinley winds up living and serves out his second term, it's highly unlikely Roosevelt ever becomes the president, simply because the party's financial benefactors would never have agreed to line up behind him out of apprehension for his populist proclivities. But Roosevelt does become the president. He serves out the remainder of McKinley's second term, and by that time, he has accrued sufficient popularity that the industrial barons have really no other choice but to throw their support behind him, even though they knew that was probably going to wind up being a self-defeating enterprise. Because what do we remember about President Theodore Roosevelt during his last 4 years, during his full term to which he had been elected in his own right? Well, the first thing we remember is Roosevelt the Trust Buster. He made all their nightmares come true when he looked them right in their beady little eyes and said, "Your monopolies have become hostile to the rights of the citizenry. So I am instructing the Congress to break your corporations up with extreme prejudice." Something we could use a bit of in the present day, I should think. But the point being, if there's never any Theodore Roosevelt presidency, Standard Oil never gets broken up, U.S. Steel never gets broken up, the railroad trusts never get broken up. And how much different does that make history look as you get into the First World War, and then the Depression, and then the Second World War? We don't know what all the differences would look like, but we do know that there would be differences, and they would be extremely vast between those events and the events that we know today as our history. And speaking of the world wars, what are the other things we remember Theodore Roosevelt for? Well, the first one has to be our status as a world naval power. That idea was largely Roosevelt's creation. As a devoted student of history, he could see the way the winds were likely to be blowing in the near to mid-term future, and he was never more sure of anything than the fact that the United States was going to require a fleet that could dominate the Atlantic and dominate the Pacific and dominate both at the same time if the need should happen to arise, which it of course did, and more than once, before the first half of the 20th century was out. So we built the Great White Fleet, and President Roosevelt sent it on a round-the-world cruise to announce our intention of standing on an equal footing with the world's great maritime powers. But there still is something missing. We can't have the best of all worlds strategically if our fleet has to go all the way around the tip of South America when we need to get from one ocean to the other. That just is not going to do. But sometimes you are blessed to have a man in charge who's not just an historical visionary, not just a man of uncommon vigor, but a man who favors bold solutions to big problems. And our engineering problem was this. We need to get ships from the Atlantic to the Pacific and vice versa, and we don't have a month in which to do it. But the planet's geography is such that Central America is blocking the desired route that we want to take. So, do you take what the planet gives you? Do you not bother trying because the French already failed? Hell no. Because that's never been a good reason to do anything. But when your leader is a man like Theodore Roosevelt, one of the only 2 Americans who won the Medal of Honor and was a father to a man who also won the Medal of Honor, he doesn't let a thing as silly as Panama get in the way of our fleet going where our fleet needs to go. He says, you find me the skinniest part of that isthmus, blow it to shit with explosives, clear the damn rubble, and report back to me when the work is done. There is only one country on God's earth that when you place a navigational hazard in our way, we simply modify the planet to get rid of it. And then, after doing all the work of creating the world's most important strategic waterway, we don't even keep it for ourselves in perpetuity. We hand it over to the Panamanians, pat them on the back, and say, sorry we cut your country in half. Please accept this magnificent canal as a token of our contrition. But without McKinley getting whacked, none of that stuff, things we regard in retrospect as crucially important to the history of the 20th century as we know it, ever happens, or at least not anywhere near as early as it did in the actual event. And future historians, let's say 100 years from today, they may come to view the result of the 2016 election as being the same sort of inflection point that we see when we look at 1896. Trump was not supposed to win that election. He wasn't supposed to have any chance of winning it. Why? Because the industrial tycoons and the media establishment, but I repeat myself, had thrown all of their money and all of their support behind the other candidate. When the result they had paid good money for or sold their professional integrity for, when that result failed to materialize, they could not mentally process what had taken place. They still haven't, many of them. They had to invent a whole complicated fantasy about Russian collusion just so they could get out of bed in the morning and figure out a way to go on with their lives. And the big tech oligarchs, they blamed themselves for not having done enough to stop it. The American people think they can elect a president of their own choosing? This aggression shall not stand, they bellowed. We were not even out of 2017 before we already had a tape of a Google staff meeting obtained by Project Veritas in which one of the company's top executives says very matter-of-factly, well, we didn't do enough last year to ensure the right result, and we're not going to let that mistake happen again. And it would seem they sure as hell didn't. It seems almost inconceivable that here we sit at the end of the 8th month of 2022, the 3rd election cycle since Trump came down the escalator, And we have yet to hear one single executive, one single media member, one single company say, maybe it's not our place to be picking winners and losers in democratic elections. Maybe we made a mistake and we shouldn't let it happen again. If anything, we've seen the exact opposite of that. Lots of people were very unsubtle about the fact that they were willing to crawl across broken glass to make sure Donald Trump did not get reelected. And lots of those same people seem just as devoted to the idea of precluding Trump from being on the ballot anywhere in 2024. We know that is the whole purpose of the fake January 6th committee. We know that's the whole purpose of the Stasi-style secret police raid on the man's private residence. The only thing that's changed, and it's the most distressing change of all, is that organs of the U.S. government, including law enforcement agencies, are taking sides in elections and endeavoring to protect certain candidates and destroy certain others. So if you are president and semi-animated cadaver Joe Biden, you can have a stripper impregnating crackhead son who jets all over the world picking up bags of cash from his influence peddling operation that he runs in your name, who breaks more laws by 9 a.m. than most armies do all day, who leaves laptop computers overflowing with evidence of his various felonious malfeasance scattered all over the eastern seaboard, and nobody in that whole family has any cause for concern. Nobody will ever be prosecuted for anything. But if you're Donald Trump, if you're the most investigated man in the history of the United States, but still don't stand credibly accused of any criminal offense whatsoever, well, you can expect nothing but a lifetime of ever-escalating persecution. You can expect everyone you have ever met or done business with to be clapped in leg irons and thrown in a prison cell. And you can expect every possible string being pulled to keep you off the ballot in the next election. While the people pulling the strings gaze into the TV cameras and assert with total sincerity that by conspiring to prevent the electorate from choosing the president they might want, they are doing something called protecting our democracy. Are there any more words left in the entire language that still have any meaning, or have they all been sacrificed on the altar of selective semantics? I guess we will have to explore the answer to that question next time, for we are done here this evening. Thanks very much for watching. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Wednesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.